Hello, everyone. We're here today with Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons. Guthrie is a fellow with the Faith and Progressive Policy Initiative and American Progress. His work focuses on a wide range of issues related to the role of religion in American public life, including promoting a progressive vision of religious liberty that champions LGBTQ rights and amplifying how faith communities empower social and economic justice. I'm also really pleased to say that he is the author of a new book coming out, Just Faith, Reclaiming Progressive Christianity, and this is coming out from Broadleaf Books. So it's actually a very well-timed book, and it's actually a well-timed interview with you, Guthrie, to be able to talk about this. So thanks very much for joining us here today.
Thanks for the invitation, Brian.
So I'm really happy about this book, and I am going to be posting several excerpts from it to the Compassionate Christianity website and social media. And, so glad that you're one of the voices taking the lead with this issue. And, there's a lot of us that feel we need to reclaim Christianity in several different ways. And that's part of what Compassionate Christianity is all about as well. So I think we share a lot of common vision elements, shall we say.
That's great. That's why I wrote the book, is to encourage, so many progressive Christians I've met all over the country. And I want to just offer this word of encouragement with the book.
So often it seems like, we as a group are very fragmented and, maybe not as well organized as we should be. But I think that that's changing. And I think, we're both helping to do that, which is a great way to spend our time, quite frankly.
It is.
So we have a big election coming up. Maybe if you just want to kind of give us your overview of where you see the country right now.
Yeah, it's been a tough almost 4 years of the Trump administration. I think from the moment he announced his candidacy, riding down that escalator and attacking immigrants from Mexico, we knew that Trumpism was evil, and we knew what he was suggesting was evil. But a lot of, I think, well-intentioned kind of people, maybe not involved in politics, thought it was kind of a show and like he talked this talk to get elected, and he would kind of moderate and become more presidential when he got into office. And now we've seen that's not the case. In fact, it's been much worse than I think most people expected. And just every democratic norm that we have has been tarnished. Any sense of common purpose for our country, where we might disagree on some issues, and people do disagree. I have a lot of strongly held opinions, but I realize people have other opinions. But there's no sense of common purpose, and there's no sense of the president trying to be a leader outside of a political candidate. And we've seen that, I think, glaringly with the pandemic response. I was just talking to some friends who were talking about, making the decision about their kids going back to school in the fall, which is a really tough decision. And this pandemic is really tough. But we're all operating under a system of complete lack of responsibility from our nation's leaders, which means every kind of sector of society, whether that's sports or education or houses of worship, they want to get back to worshiping in person in our beautiful sanctuaries, are left on our own. And I think that's how people feel right now, on our own. Everyone in this country, I think, is waiting for a sense of common purpose again, which is why I'm excited about this election on November 3rd. I'm excited about turning the page on Trumpism. I'm cautiously optimistic about Joe Biden administration, even though I don't agree with Joe Biden on every issue. Joe Biden was not my first, second, third, fourth, fifth choice in the Democratic primary, but I'm cautiously optimistic because I think Joe Biden, in stark contrast to Trump, while he may disagree with people, sees a common country, a nation to lead. And so that's why I'm optimistic about things changing. It's been a hard time for everyone watching, I know, during this pandemic, But when we hit 100 days on Sunday, I felt a lift of spirits just within me that I can make it 100 days. And then once we send such a strong signal by electing Joe Biden, then I think we'll everything won't change again. There'll be disagreements, but this constant lack of everyone kind of flailing in the wind because we have no leader, hopefully will change.
So the title of this series that we're doing is called Faith, Hope, and Love During an Election. And the country is about as polarized as I think I've ever seen it. Mm-hmm. So what ways have you found to be most effective in speaking with people about various issues who don't necessarily share your views?
I think you start from a place of honoring that people can reasonably come to different opinions on issues. I think something I write about in the book, for instance, is when I've struggled personally with when the United States should engage in military conflict. That is, perhaps the highest responsibility of our nation's leaders is to send people into harm's way. And I think it's a really tough question because I really appreciate, and growing up in a liberal family and a liberal church, I saw the kind of Quaker, Mennonite, peace church tradition of pacifism. And that's one view that it really resonates with me. It resonates with my reading of the gospel. But then I also grew up in a time when the U.S. didn't intervene in the Rwandan genocide. And there's a very strong argument that some sort of limited intervention in that conflict might have prevented a genocide. And so I grew up with a lot of humanitarian intervention talk that also resonated with my sense of justice and kind of a just war theory coming out of the Catholic tradition, that there is a very narrow sense of when foreign intervention and war might be necessary. Again, that's also a very hard discussion to have because we've seen endless unjust war in the Middle East almost my entire life after 9/11. And so I grew up hearing, my dad was in the kind of Vietnam generation. And so I heard a lot about the unjust war in Vietnam. And so I think that kind of complex issue, to recognize where people are coming from, that people can come to different determinations, goes a long way. I do think at the same time, there are some issues in which you have to draw a really strong line around, that we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of Charlottesville and the big Unite the Right rally there, where they had the neo-Nazis marching. That kind of thing we need to I don't think it's good to say, well, you're a neo-Nazi and, I'm not a neo-Nazi and we need to see each other's points of view. So yes, there are issues, and you kind of have to go issue by issue for me, where we can see people of good conscience and faith and are trying their best for Christian ethics, are actually trying to read the Bible and discern how God might be speaking to our current issues today. But then there are some issues in which I don't think, so I wouldn't want to overgeneralize and say for every issue, see both sides, because there's a dangerous false, both siderism that we can also fall into.
So there are a ton of serious policy issues, I think many of us would agree, that need to be dealt with. In your view, what's the highest priority?
I think the highest priority for me is a sense of common purpose for our country, that there are issues we can come together around. And the top issue that we need to come together around in the United States and around the world is combating climate change, because we have to care for the earth. We have to care for our shared planet. It's something that should unite. When we talk about a common purpose for all of humanity, our survival as a species, as all of humanity is threatened, not uniformly, because those that are most vulnerable around the world are threatened more than those of us who live very comfortably in the United States. But no human on Earth will be untouched by climate change and is already feeling the effects of climate change. I think there's also, since a lot of my work deals with religious advocacy and how people of faith approach politics, I think there's so much room for people of all faith traditions all around the world to unite in this common purpose to combat climate change and have a green revolution. And a revolution, I think, I love how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Green New Deal ties climate change and combating the climate crisis with guaranteeing a job and kind of investing in a Green New Deal. I write about in the book about the social gospel motivations of the New Deal and FDR. And I think addressing the climate crisis could bring about this whole new sense of purpose, putting Americans to work, creating a whole new economy. It's exciting, and I think it will go past a lot of those divisions you were talking about earlier. If we can actually find the will to do something on climate change, which it means kind of pushing aside the concerns of a very small group of the oil lobbyists and the people that are invested in fracking and all of that.
Isn't it just amazing? I mean, it's such an indictment in our political system when, that small a percentage of the population and, of the country, because of their economic power, can have such outsized influence and not be acting in the common good.
Not at all, which is why so many people think campaign finance reform is the top issue. That if without campaign finance reform and getting big money out of politics, that it's hard to it's hard to have collective action on any issue without that piece. That resonates a lot with me.
That's a pretty high one on my list too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just ridiculous. So another big issue
is no matter how else we're going to get along, no matter what other issues we have, we're so far behind in addressing the climate crisis and if we don't up the urgency of that and put it at the top of the list, it'll be more and more, too late, if it's not too late already, which is a dark thought, but one that we have to kind of acknowledge and reckon with.
I mean, we are really late, and it is such a fundamental issue that affects everyone. And so it really, really is incredibly important to deal with. Another issue that has raised itself significantly in prominence is racism. Mm-hmm. And, it's been a lot of turmoil, a lot of tension, but at the same time, maybe it's finally forcing this country to deal with something that has been not dealt with for centuries, literally. Mm-hmm. So what suggestions would you like to see politicians take after the election to combat systemic racism?
That's a great question. And racism is certainly the most pressing kind of issue right now in our country, with rightly so. And I think the legislation that's exciting to me the most is one that's sponsored by the congresswoman I had growing up in Houston, Sheila Jackson Lee, who's an amazing member of Congress and was so instrumental kind of in my political development, because she also leaned into her faith quite a bit and actively talks about her faith. I just saw this very moving image of her and Reverend Dr. William Barber. Both were visiting the casket of John Lewis and touching it at the same time together. And Sheila Jackson Lee has legislation to create a study on reparations, which I think for a long time has been this kind of fringe or kind of idea that didn't have a lot of mainstream support, but it is building. And I think that people of faith should be leaders in the push for reparations, because we know that repentance means some kind of action. It means it's not just like false reconciliation where people are like, oh, we're going to be post-racial and we're not racist anymore. There need to be reparations. There needs to be some kind of accounting and I think redistribution of wealth that can go to these kind of deep systemic economic harms. And I love how Reverend Barber talks about policy racism as well. What every policy needs to be examined through a lens of what are the, with a racial equity lens when we're creating policies. And I hope, and I'm confident that the Biden administration would do that. I think they put out a plan this week about racial equity, throughout the administration, which is how we should judge any policy.
I didn't see that, but that sounds really good. I'm going to have to look that up and see what I can share about that. So obviously encouraging more people to vote is of paramount importance. But beyond that, what other steps would you suggest to just the average, layperson out there in order to affect positive change between now and the election?
I would say make voting a social norm. Like talk about it, expect it of your social networks, ask people if they're voting. And I think there's an assumption, at least in my social circles, that everyone's voting. But we're not. There's actually, in most states, there's a perception that your vote doesn't matter because there's talk about what battleground states are. So if you don't live in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, your vote doesn't matter because you live in a red state or a blue state. And that's false. Your vote does matter. And the only way your state is going to become a battleground state or is going to matter more is if people get out and vote. We here in Kentucky, where I live, people write it off as a red state. Well, my vote doesn't matter. And we just had an electrifying Senate primary here where Charles Booker, really got a lot of people. He didn't win the primary, but he made the race really exciting. So I think there is a sense that you can make people through kind of everybody in your socials. And I saw him gain traction just by people posting on Facebook or Twitter or something that everyone can do and kind of build excitement around the election. And so I think one big block for people being kind of active about their citizenship and trying to get their friends involved and family members involved, and people who say, oh, I don't care, my vote doesn't matter. And actually trying to persuade people that you have in your sphere of influence to actually vote and do something. A big block is the, red state, blue state, apathy. But then it's also that I think around Joe Biden specifically, it's that if a candidate doesn't isn't the perfect ideal candidate, or there's some issue with them, that we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And we let the kind of, well, I don't want to put myself out there because I disagree with him about X, Y, or Z. And I think we have to kind of realize what's at stake in this election, which is another 4 years of Donald Trump as president, and try to get up some excitement, or at least be willing to engage and be explicit with your social circle around why voting is important and why you're voting the way you do. I think Linda Sarsour had a great line. She's a Muslim activist, big Bernie supporter, very far left kind of person. And she said, I'm voting for Biden. This was last week. Biden spoke at a big Muslim summit. And she said on Twitter, I'm voting for Biden and I'll be out protesting against him when I disagree with him. You're not like trading in your protest card just by saying you're voting for somebody. So I would say vote, but be a vocal voter and be a advocate for voting within and to everyone you know.
Yeah, great advice. We kind of take it for granted that, of course we're going to vote, but, we need to really encourage that more broadly. So I think that's something that I will take to heart. So what about for religious leaders, leading up to the election? What advice do you have for them or how they talk to their congregations, what they do in terms of the lead up to the election?
First, I want to acknowledge the fear. The fear a lot of religious leaders have of talking about politics is that they'll violate some kind of tax code, that they'll jeopardize their tax exempt status, or that they will upset someone in their congregation who has different political views than them, or that they'll be perceived as being like the religious right. I get this a lot when people, when I talk so openly about politics and my views, is that we don't want to be the religious right who use their political views in the Bible in a kind of theocratic sense of like, the Bible says this, so we should legislate that way. So there's a lot of fear and trepidation that I sense among faith leaders, especially white Christians. In the Black church, there's a very healthy, like, souls to the polls, like we're going to get everyone on Sunday to go vote after church. But in a lot of white congregations that maybe have a greater diversity of political beliefs in them, there is some trepidation. So it's real. And I want to encourage people to try to identify what's preventing them from being actively engaged in politics. And that's not to be partisan. That's not to be a shill for the Democratic Party. It's to be political because the gospel is political, because following Jesus and loving your neighbors commits you to a certain type of political engagement, because your neighbors' lives are at stake. Your neighbors' lives are being discarded. Your neighbors' lives are not, we have enough resources in this country to take care of everybody and provide everybody a basic standard of living, a basic life where they can pursue their God-given dreams and have their dignity recognized. So I want to encourage people to be political, to get involved in nonpartisan political engagement, voter registration, voter mobilization, sharing what Faith in Public Life, a great organization, put out a voter guide. At the individual level, you could put out a voter guide, which is just what are our principles that should guide people at the ballot box. And don't give in to the fear, have faith over fear, and realize that there's an obligation to do something, especially when what most people hear about Christianity and politics mixing is a very negative kind of conservative vision. So I think that's more reason to get involved in political activism.
So just to finish up, what do you view as the one most important outcome of the election that you hope to see?
Well, just personally, I'd like to wake up and not worry about what the president has tweeted. It's strange to wonder what new kind of terrible thing has happened in the country. I think an outcome of the election is a president who listening to their advisors, a president who brings in people of different ideologies and religions and beliefs. We see this with the Bernie Biden task force that just came out with policy recommendations, where after the primary season, they had these task forces on different issues such as climate and immigration and healthcare. And it wasn't to say that Bernie and Biden agreed on everything. No, that we had a whole election, and Biden won the election, won the primary election. But it was to have a common kind of platform negotiated. I think that shows that the Biden administration will be open to feedback, open to listening. And that's what I'm excited about, that when there's a problem, when there's a pandemic, we'll listen to the doctors and we'll listen to Dr. Fauci.
What a concept.
What a concept. Dr. Fauci will be listened to. I mean, this thing about President Trump was so upset about Fauci that he made up being offered to throw out the first pitch at the Yankees game. It's like, I don't think we'll have to worry about that in a Biden administration. I think he'll be listening to the experts and not always agreeing, not always coming out where maybe I would if I was the decision maker. but there will be a sense of more of community, more of openness, more of feedback from people who disagree with him. And that's what and a sense of common purpose. Restoring Biden's tagline, restoring the soul of the nation, resonates a lot with me, that there is this sense of, and he has a long record of working with Republicans in the Senate on various issues. And that's something I'm looking for. And then listening to the more lefty, I mean, he's adopted a lot of Elizabeth Warren's ideas. So he's listening to people on both sides of him, which is something I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Guthrie, thank you again for joining us. It was really great to catch up with you again, and really looking forward to your book, Just Faith. I highly recommend it. I've already read it. As I said, I'm going to be posting quite a few excerpts from it. It's just an excellent book. I think it's highly recommended reading. So Guthrie, thanks again, and please stay in touch.
Thanks so much.